So the next thing I wanted to talk about was participation. So getting people involved in the actual making of the project or the financing or using their skills early on is really important. So this is an extreme example. It's a project called Tell Me More, an Italian project, which was launched on Rai Fiction last year in Italy. And it brought a community of teenage girls together to develop a television series. And it's based on very sort of like collaborative creative theories called the grammar of fantasy, which was a theory brought together by a group of visionary 1960s educators and communicators in Italy. And so what the producer did was he helped develop this very finely crafted listen and engage game where he very sensitively got teenage girls to start sharing their thoughts about life and love and the world and what they wanted to do in the future. And this kind of like game was the beginning of how they started the story process. And the only theme that he started with was music. That was the only theme that they defined the project. And it was quite well designed as well in terms of the sort of listen and engage game. So they had 3 community managers and 2 psychologists working on the project, because when you're working with teenage girls as well, you have to be quite sensitive and you're asking them kind of personal questions. So it was a very interesting development process that actually collected the raw material for the professional writers to work with. And the game is going to be continued all the way through the production and the distribution process. And it was funny, when I first met Carlo, who was a producer from Tempesta, I was very kind of dubious about having a total sort of, where you start with something that's completely undefined as a story. And it was quite interesting looking at how this game, because it was so well designed as a game, how it actually did generate, incredible ideas and how they've worked with professional storytellers. So it's an extreme example of participative storytelling. So just looking at some of the very successful crowdfunding campaigns, who's heard of Star Citizen here? So Star Citizen is an upcoming space simulation game with 4 components, and it holds the Guinness Book of Records title for the largest ever crowd-funded project. So it's over $130 million so far.
It will be here on Friday.
Oh, really? Yes. Oh, amazing. Fantastic. Are they going to do a case study of this? Great, because what's interesting about this project, it was actually funded on a proprietary platform that was designed for it by a company in Montreal called Turbulent. And there are over, I think, 1 million contributions so far, a huge amount of people to coordinate. And they chose to go off Kickstarter because it was gaining such traction, and they wanted to sort of have a platform that was much more, that had much more functionality in it, where they could publish content on different formats. And also it allowed them to collect very sophisticated data around the users and community. And so this is just an example of a project that's gone off the crowdfunding campaign, but a really interesting example. And the person who designed the platform, Marc Baudet, who also did a lot of the community management in his company, gave a really great speech at Power to the Pixel last year, and there's a video of that. So I don't know how much they're going to talk about the development of the franchise or the marketing, but that's a great companion piece to whatever you'll listen to on Friday. The next project I wanted to talk about, because I think this is a really interesting project because it's been going for so long, is Iron Sky. And I'm sure many of you have heard of it. It's a sci-fi fantasy franchise from Finland by a company called Blindspot. And we first started featuring this project in 2008. So it was our second year. We did our forum. And they, right from the beginning of development, started building a community around the project that still is active 8 years later. So they're in their second feature film now. They're in post-production. But it was interesting looking at how they developed the first film and how they've sort of moved on to the second one. There are also games attached in the story world, graphic novels, and they do sort of live gaming events as well, and role-playing games. But Iron Sky, the first thing they did was threw out a very, very high-end teaser trailer, and then they started crowdfunding on their own platforms. It was pre-Kickstarter and pre-Indiegogo. And the original budget of the first film was 7 million euros, and they raised 1 million in crowdfunding. But it was a very interesting finance plan because the rest of the money was traditional film finance, the 6 million. So it was made up of, it was an Australian, Finnish, German co-production, and because they all through the campaign, they designed some interesting products that kept their community engaged. I mean, there was one that was called Request a Screening, which they still use, where fans put in their email and zip code, so really important data. And they could show that to distributors. It was actually people requesting to see the film in a theatre, so in a cinema. And they also had a platform called Rec-A-Movie, which enabled fans to sort of submit ideas and to discuss them in a forum. So by the time it got to the Berlin Film Festival, so that was 4 years later, it was 2012, it had sold in every single territory in the world, which is kind of unheard of for an independent film. It was his second film, but the first film was a no-budget movie. So this is his first properly financed film. And it's kind of extraordinary to have that kind of traction with the traditional industry. So the second film that's in post at the moment, it's really good to go to their site and to keep following what they do, because they're permanently doing things, and they have a community management team that's worked since the beginning of 2008. So if you, I'm sure Tourbillon, when they speak on Friday, will talk about this idea that your community management is such an important part of your project planning, and it's something I've seen often handed to an intern. So it's something you really have to factor into project development. So great looking on their site, because they're in post-production still, but they still have got a very, very active in terms of how they're involving their community. So now they have this thing called franchise, which they actively ask their fans to submit ideas that are part of the Iron Sky world, and to pitch them. I think it's 500 characters or something. And then they actually are going to select ideas and produce and finance them. And then the second one is they're still looking for investment. So they've got a new investment scheme called Producers Pool, where they're asking for, I think it's 200 times $5,000 investment. So it's always interesting looking at what these guys are up to, because it changes the whole time. And they've got very cool ideas for raising money and for participatory work with their fans.